I know it's the question, who watches The Watchmen, but my question is it worth it anymore? So I want to talk about the possibility that HBO is going to do a series, whether it is a mini-series, whether they do multiple seasons of it, based on Watchmen. Now, this is not new news. I didn't talk about this when the news first broke, that this is something that they are exploring and developing. So why talk about it now? Well, I didn't talk about it at the time because I just kind of shrugged it off. I basically thought, well, that's what they should have done in the first place instead of the movie, and kind of moved on from it. But unfortunately, the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, I'm not sure if this is a good idea either. And I had an experience recently that gives me a point of reference to be able to solidify it better. Before I get into that, I'm going to touch on the Zack Snyder directed Watchmen movie very briefly. I could very easily dedicate an entire video as to why I don't think that movie works, despite staying incredibly true to the source material. But I'm not going to get into all that. If people really want to hear me dissect why Watchmen as a film doesn't work, I'd be happy to do so, but that's not why I'm here today. So the thing is, doing Watchmen as a TV series, whether it is a mini-series or multiple seasons, would have been the much better way to do it, because that sort of episode-by-episode sequential storytelling hews closer to what the comic book is. And the reason I think that's important is because Alan Moore as a writer really takes advantage of what works in comic books, and those are things that don't necessarily work in other mediums, especially the further away you get from it. In the case of Watchmen specifically, I'll just single this out real quick. The comic book, if you read it as a graphic novel, it's not quite the same, but you gotta remember this was released in monthly issues. Now, because you have that break, you get each issue you've got a month from when that comes out until the next one comes out to digest everything you got. I mean, that's part of why Watchmen is so dense. It was actually going to be worth it for you to keep coming back to this thing over the course of a month until the next issue came out. But also, because each issue was closed off, it allowed each issue to delve into something very specific, whether it was the history of the Minutemen, whether it was Rorschach's mental state, whether it was the origins of Dr. Manhattan, and just zero in on that and only deal with that. Film doesn't really work like that. Film, you really kind of need more of a through line for it to work. I don't say need like it's an absolute, but that's what film does well. Film does centrally focus forward momentum very well, and that's not Watchmen. But sort of being able to do it as episodes, closed off the way that the issues are closed off, that is closer to it and would allow you to have honoring the source material actually work. Because as I said, the movie was very true to the source material in terms of recreating the imagery and using the same words, but because it was so tailored to that original medium, it loses its strength. Now, unfortunately, I think we've hit a point now, even though a mini-series or TV series is what they should have done in the first place, I actually think it's now not worth doing it because the movie has already come out. Again, not because, the movie did it as well as it could do it, but because the movie is so accurate to the original comics in terms of what it presents up there. Even though I feel it doesn't work, all you can do is basically present the same thing Zack Snyder already presented, but just do it in a format that is more appropriate, because it really is so direct. The visual point of reference, the story point of reference, the character references were translated so directly. Improving the narrative I don't think is going to be enough, because we're going to be shrugging going, yeah, I saw this. Maybe this is a little better, but I'm getting the same thing again. And I feel like the movie I feel like if it was going to be that accurate, we were only going to get one shot at it, and the movie was the shot. And again, I personally don't think it worked. It's because this isn't a case where the movie happened and it got everything wrong, so we're going to do the miniseries and do it right, which was the theory behind something like, say, Stephen King's The Shining miniseries. Now, that's not me saying The Shining is better than the movie, but that's me saying there was validity in that, because so much was changed in the movie version that Stephen King said, no, let's do something that's much more accurate. And so, they were able to do that. Now, the obvious solution to that would be to change stuff so that it makes it worth revisiting again. But Watchmen doesn't hold up to that. And part of what got me started thinking about this again was actually seeing Spider-Man Homecoming. Because I said in my review that I liked all of the changes that were done to specific characters, to some of the lore, to Peter himself and his home situation and everything. I liked pretty much all the changes. And part of the reason I liked the changes was because with Sam Raimi's movie, his first two movies at least, we got really comic accurate representation of these characters, or at least, sort of their initial 60s to early 70s versions of these characters. It was incredibly comic accurate to those in terms of how Peter behaved, how Flash behaved, Mary Jane, Aunt May, Uncle Ben, the Green Goblin, Harry, all of it. It felt like it was lifted directly out of the books, and visually it felt a lot like that too. So since we already had our super comic accurate version of Spider-Man, I was actually quite relieved and engaged to see Spider-Man Homecoming. I think I said that in my review too. Homecoming, play with these elements a little bit more and do something a little more different with them. And that's the sort of thing I would have resisted if Spider-Man Homecoming was the first movie version of Spider-Man we had. I wouldn't have been accepting of those changes because I would have been like, well, can't we get, the accurate version first? Well, since we did, now that's fine. Now, you'd think that would mean I'd be going, well, with Watchmen, now do a more looser version. You'll have the freedom to do that. Except there's a big difference between Watchmen and Spider-Man, and that is Spider-Man has decades, it's got about 50 years roundabout of history to him in terms of stories and characters and ways the main character has been interpreted and things that have happened to him. So there's a lot to pull from, and because it's changed so much, it's harder to even say that there is a definitive version of Spider-Man. And like I said, even Sam Raimi's version was definitive to the version of Spider-Man he grew up reading. But that's not the case with Watchmen. There is a definitive Watchmen. There's only one Watchmen story. Yes, I know they made the extra stuff before Watchmen, but are any of us really bringing that on board? Really? I suppose that, HBO could bring that in for additional material. I don't think that's worth doing. But again, my point is Watchmen, for as long as it's been out, is just the one narrative. You don't have the freedom to go, back when we did it last time, it was that villain. Now we'll do this other villain that wasn't in the last. No. It's the same story. And it has to be the same story, because if it's not the same story, then it's not Watchmen anymore. Watchmen is not just a thematic story. It is a meticulous story, down to the fine details. Everything in that book means something, feeds into something, and is there for a reason. Now, that's not me saying absolutely every detail has to be recreated, but it does mean that you cannot just willy-nilly start changing stuff, because everything matters. Every brick in this building matters. You start poking at them and the whole thing could easily come down. And everything in that book is a load-bearing brick, which probably isn't a thing. I don't know construction, but I hope you get what I'm saying there. And if you can't differentiate it from the movie, it's going to not feel like it's an endeavor worth taking. But to differentiate it from the movie is just going to wreck it. Is just going to... The things that they would have to do to make it different from the movie would most likely make the story not work anymore. Because, just to be blunt about it, no matter who they get to make this thing, and I believe it's Damon Lindelof working on it, Damon Lindelof, you, sir, are not Alan Moore. So, if you're going to go in and try and add new material and make it seem like Alan Moore, it's not going to work. You want a recent comparison for that? Look at the additional stuff that was written for the animated version of The Killing Joke. You can tell, you can draw a hard line between the stuff that was written by other people, namely Brian Azzarello, and the stuff that was lifted directly from the comic, i.e. essentially written by Alan Moore. huge, staggering difference. Alan Moore, it sounds like I worship at the altar of Alan Moore. Alan Moore is not a flawless person. He's not even a flawless writer, but he's an incredibly good writer. And when he is on, he's kind of unimpeachable. And he was definitely on when he wrote Watchmen. So if you can't change it, but the movie version we already got, which was widely seen, I mean, I know it underperformed to what Warner Brothers had hoped, but a lot of people know it. Certainly the fans all know it, and we've already gotten it, and that, retained everything and made it look like Watchmen and sound like Watchmen. What's the miniseries gonna do? Just add in more details, but it's just gonna be... It's just going to be the same thing longer again. It's going to feel like the super extended cut of the movie. Now, maybe there's another angle that they can take with that, but again, Watchmen is not a story that lends itself to, I've got a new spin on this. A lot of comic books are. Superhero comic books especially. Anything long running. There's a ton of room to reinterpret. Go in there, give it your own spin. Not Watchmen, though. It is a singular work. It really is. And I think it's an amazing piece of work. And if the movie had never been made, I would be so cautiously pumped for the idea of an HBO series. But the movie happened. And the movie happened visually, superficially, very accurate to the comic. And I think that makes it impossible now to make a TV version that's going to be worth seeing, because it's either going to feel like the same thing again or it's not going to feel like Watchmen. So there's me doing that thing I often do, which is to just say why something that other people are getting excited about is probably going to suck. I don't mean to be this negative. I really don't. It's what my brain does. And sometimes I expel that out and you folks get it. Sorry. In any case, that's my thoughts on the possibility of Watchmen becoming a TV series on HBO. What are your thoughts on it? In exactly what way do you think I am a massive idiot? If you can do so without wishing death upon me or any other bodily harm, go ahead and leave your comments down below. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, check me out on Twitter at Council of Geeks. Give a listen to the Council of Geeks podcast, available on iTunes and Stitcher. I am also one half of the Punch Like a Girl podcast, also available on iTunes and Stitcher. And until next time, this council is adjourned.